Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hannick here with co-host Mario Ramos-Reyes. Today we'll discuss the life and legacy of Brother Andrew, the co-founder with St. Mother Teresa of the Missionaries of Charity Brothers. Our welcome and special guest is Carmel Duca, Missionaries of Charity. He is the author of Redeemed by Beauty, The Life of Brother Andrew, published originally by St. Paul's in Mumbai 2022, and also now via En route Books and Media. It's available on Amazon, and if you're subscribed to the right kind of Kindle, it's free. Otherwise, you can purchase it on Kindle for a modest price and an equally modest price hardcover. Now, Brother Carmel was born in Malta in 1965. Something of a kid, don't you know? Just a kid. In 1965, and after graduating from University of Malta, he joined the Missionaries of Charity Brothers in 1990. Let's begin, as we always do, in prayer. Come, O Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Brother Carmel, just to get us started, what led you personally to join the Missionaries of Charity?
I would say my first contact with the Missionaries of Charity came through the Third World group. I was still in Malta at that time, and I had joined the Third World group. We were a group of young people, and we were interested in social issues around the world and even in our native Malta. And then during our holidays, both summer and Easter and Christmas, we used to go to the MC sisters in Italy to help them. And I remember from the first time I visited one of the MC sisters' house, it was in Palermo in Sicily in 1982, that I started asking whether they had brothers. I never asked whether they had priests. I always, there was always this inkling in me of becoming a brother. No, there was always this desire, even of doing something with the poor. I remember when I was maybe 7 years old, there used to come a woman every Friday knocking at our door and begging for food, and I still remember her face, and then there used to be also another group who, during their summer holidays, they used to come and collect things for the missions, and I remember telling myself, when I grow up, I will do that also, and eventually I did it. I joined the Third World group, and we were helping our sisters, and to the Third World group I owe my vocation and my formation between 82 and 90.
8 years to remember.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I know Mario, who is himself an author, and I can claim only to be a paper grader, but Mario's an author. I know he's going to ask you why you wrote this book of yours. Go ahead, Mario. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
No. Oh, you're asking Mario or me?
I'm asking Mario to ask you. What's the scoop? What's the skinny? What drove you to authorship?
Right. Why did you write the Redeemed by Beauty? The title is beautiful, by the way. Why did you write this book, and what is the topic of your book?
Okay, the topic is, let me start from the topic. The topic is the biography of Brother Andrew, who was co-founder with Mother Teresa of the Missionaries of Charity Brothers, where I belong, you know. And the reason why I wrote it is because I was commissioned to. The same in 2016 there was the general chapter, and during the meetings, the brothers realized that we needed to start recording the life of Brother Andrew, especially, and most probably we'll talk about it, especially during the last 10 or 12 years of his life when he left the congregation. We didn't have much information of what he did during that time, even though we knew. So the chapter asked me, the general superior of the time asked me whether I could write the book, you know. Also because his family members, his sisters and brothers, they were already dead by that time. There are still some nephews and nieces, but people who are close to him, even brothers and sisters in the congregation, they were dying. So we needed to do it quickly.
Okay. Why the title by beauty? Redeemed by Beauty.
Most probably it was cribbed from Dostoevsky, no? that the word will be redeemed by beauty at the end. And I believe that Andrew was redeemed by beauty. Andrew was a person, I would say he was a mystic, not in the sense of seeing visions or locutions or hearing the voice of God directly in the sense of a voice, but he could see misery, he could see beauty amidst misery. Obviously, he could see the beauty for beauty's sake, you know? Especially, for instance, he wrote a lot about the beauty of the nature in Guatemala, of the Cachiquel Mayans, you know? He loved Guatemala whenever he used to visit. But on the other side, he could see the beauty during misery, in the midst of misery, in the midst of the poor, in poverty, you know? And from the other side, I think God and the beauty, the beauty of God and the beauty, I would call it the capital B, you know, the divine.
It's very interesting. Let me ask a question or an objection that I often hear about that claim. So you seek beauty in reality. You look around and your gaze is just wondering about that beauty, which somehow resemble the beauty of the transcendent God. But at the same time, reality is not just made of things that uplift our heart. Also is full of violence, anger, misery. Evil is present there. So if you go to, I don't know, the Ukrainian war, the front, you're going to see violence, hatred, everything. How then you are going to claim that going there, looking at what happened, this is beauty?
I'm not saying that it is beauty, no. I would give the example of one of the most, again, I'm going to use the word beautiful, one of the most beautiful letters which Brother Andrew writes in 1971. It is one of my favorites. and he's doing his 8-day retreat in Calcutta, and he decides to spend the night in Howrah Station. Howrah Station nowadays, thousands of people pass every day. No, there are still some people who live in Howrah Station. But in 1971, which is 50 years ago almost, well, not almost, actually, 50 years ago, there were many more people living on the platforms of Howrah Station. People who make Howrah Station their home or house. And he decides to spend the night, and he sees this family made of a woman with cropped hair. He mentions an old sari, wearing an old sari, and she had like 5 children, and they sit down in the night eating small pieces of bread. He thinks most probably brought from leftover restaurants or whatever. So they eat, they wash their plates, and he says, but it wasn't a sad meal. He said after that, one of the small boys of the family, he gets up, they were sitting on the ground, he gets up and he starts dancing. And he said they were happy, they were a happy family. No? And he says it's there that the meaning of that song, dance, dance wherever you may be, I am the Lord of the dance, that he becomes reality. Sort of, yes, the misery is there, the poverty is there, the suffering is there, but he could see that also amidst now taking yes, the war in Ukraine, or sort of, I would say, what about all those people who are going as volunteers on the borders of Ukraine, doctors, nurses, and helping the refugees? That is the beauty, in a way. It's not the beauty of the war.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned, brother, a particular letter of Brother Andrew's. He wrote many letters, and they're spread all over the place, and you had to track them down. Did you think that writing this book would involve the research that it did, and the time that it involved?
When I first was asked to go to India to research and write the book, they gave me 1 year time. And eventually it was a 5-year job, and still I would say there's still much more to do, because while traveling, I went to Australia, I went to other places, and I was asked people whether they had personal letters from Andrew, photos, because then we realized that we needed to start building the archives of the congregation. We already had some things, but not as many as we have now, between letters, photos, and videos, and audio recordings of his talks. Yeah, it was a big job, and it still is. I hope the congregation would continue in archiving this stuff. Yeah.
Well, they originally commissioned you, and you should get permission to continue the commission.
Yes, to extent. Well, we have a new leadership, so we're still waiting to see what is their agenda.
You know, in so many areas of our lives, there are new leaders, and we're always looking for more new leaders. In fact, some of us say, let us leave no stone unturned in order to find a new leader. Now here's a compare and contrast. Dorothy Day's cause for canonization, and she is now a servant of God, quite recently, in the last few months, I think, took a step forward when, get this, I've got the statistic right. Sometimes I just fake them, but this time I've got the statistic right. Some 38,000 pages of material were forwarded to Rome on her work and her mission. And among them were a great many letters, because most of her life she was a pre-email person. In fact, I think all of her life she was a pre-email person. And so letters are certainly included there.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned a place which to many of us seems far, far away, although they're beginning to make an imprint via Western-themed television shows. You mentioned Australia, and you could combine, imagine a Venn diagram here, Australia and the Jesuit order. So if you had an Australian Jesuit, how did Andrew come to be involved with the Missionaries of Charity? I mean, it's not like he grew up in Albania or someplace. It was even more remote. It was Australia.
Well, those are the coincidences of God, most probably, which we call providence. Andrew, he joined the Jesuits in 1952 in Australia, and that was the first year that the Australian Jesuits sent a group of Australian Jesuits to India.
That was a warm-up for sending them to Los Angeles, right?
Well, yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so in 52 he joined the Jesuits. In 54 he took his first vows, and after that he asked to go to India. So he arrived in India in early 55. He did all his philosophy studies and theology studies in India, between Ranchi and Pune, the western part of India. Eventually, in 1965, he was up for his tertianship. Now, as early as 1960, before he was ordained, he already started thinking and asking his superiors to go and live in a slum area in New Delhi. His superiors, they were all in favor of it, but after he would be ordained. So they were asking him, just wait. After he ordained, they asked him, well, wait for tertianship. In 1965, it was time for his tertianship. In November 65, he was asked to give a talk about social issues in Delhi at a conference where Mother Teresa was also present. She was giving a talk. So most probably they spoke there, and she invited him to go and visit the small group of men she had started in 1963, and he accepted. His idea was not to join the brothers. His idea was to go and see what they were doing, to get ideas of what he can do with the poor. Eventually, December 65, he went to Calcutta. He worked with this small group of brothers, and she asked him whether he can take over the direction and the formation of the brothers. And
Brother, let me interrupt just for a second. We're starting to get a little bit of feedback. Do you hear that, Mario?
Yes.
Why are you doing that to us, Mario?
No, I'm not.
Well, goodness knows I'm innocent. If anybody's doing something they shouldn't be doing, I just say stop. No, so far it's just been minimal, but I thought we could nip it in the bud. I mean, we could nip it in the bud. Go ahead. Excuse my interruption.
Okay. So that was the end of 1965. After getting all the permissions, he joined the brothers in 1966, in February 66. that's how became involved with the brothers and the MCs.
Right now, Mario and I are always trying to recruit people for the American Solidarity Party. And I mention that only because if you're going to start a religious order, you have to have people in the order. And how is it that Brother Andrew, recruited so many people so quickly? How did he do that?
I don't know.
Or were trucks involved? Were trucks involved? Did he move people in trucks?
Well, that's because you know about the truck vocation.
Yeah, so let's not try to suppress the evidence. If Mario and I had a truck, we put a lot of people on it.
It's funny when we mentioned the truck vocation in the congregation, there are some brothers, they become very edgy and fidgety and they don't like it. Because the idea that we always had that Andrew, he went with a truck to Ranchi and he collected all these boys and he told them, come with me to Calcutta, which was not the case. No, when Andrew came with the brothers, he still had a lot of contact with the Jesuits, especially the Jesuits in villages around the Ranchi area where he was working. So he was going and coming and having communication with young boys who were looking for something new, most probably. Eventually, one day, he was taking some supply. Well, it wasn't he, but the truck which belonged to Mother Teresa was going to take some supplies to Ranchi from Calcutta and coming back empty. So he took the opportunity to bring these boys with whom he had been communicating, and he brought them back to Calcutta. That is the famous truck vocation. But why? It's an interesting question. Why were young people joining something totally new? And most probably, I would say because it was something new in the church also. We're talking about 1965, 66, 67, and afterwards, which is after the Vatican Council. No? Maybe not for the Indian vocations, but for sure, I would say for the American young men who joined later, most probably they were looking for something new in the church. No? For sure, it was the case with Korea, where we had an explosion of the number of brothers there. Because when the brothers went to Korea in late 70s, it was totally new in the church. A group of people who were living simply and working for the poor and picking up people from the streets. It was something new, even for the same church. So I would say also there is the charisma of Andrew, the charm of the Traverse Ball. His friends, his Jesuit friends who are still alive or who are still alive when I interviewed them, they spoke about the charm of the Traverse Ball, which most probably, Traverse Ball was his surname, his family name, by the way. But most probably the charm came from his mother, whom they knew also. So in a country like Korea, where he did not speak a word of Korean, and yet he started another group of so-called sort of religious for women with physical disabilities who could not make it in a monastery or in religious life. And he started them, and they consider him as their co-founder without being able to speak Korean, and yet they saw something in him.
What a story, gosh. Mario, what next here?
So, Father Andrew, it seems to me there was have a few encounters. And so grace must be part of it. Now, explain to me, I think I read something about Father Brother Andrew experience about Vietnam. What was that?
Yeah. Okay, as soon as he joined the brothers in 66, he already wanted to start expanding the congregation even outside India, which I don't think it was a good move. You have a small group of brothers and already you want to expand, but which he did not. Now, I had already mentioned that he went to India in 1954. No, he never went back to Australia to visit his family. So in 1972, 6 years after he joined the brothers, he told the brothers, you know, I haven't been to Australia to see my family. It's time that I go for my home visit. I see that the group of brothers, it's quite stable. In 6 years, it has somewhat grown and they were stable in their work. So he told them, I think it's time that I go for my home visit. He spent 4 months in Australia and then coming back, that was November 72, he decided to stop in Vietnam. Now, why Vietnam? He says that he read an article in the newspaper by somebody called Zorza, and he decided to go to Vietnam. I don't fully believe that. No, I believe that he knew what was going on politically, even between Australia and Vietnam. Australia politically, they were supporting a lot Vietnam, especially because the president at the time, in the 50s, 60s, he was Catholic. He did visit Australia, and Australia took a commitment to try to stop, first of all, to try to stop communism coming into Australia. They were scared, but they tried to do something in order to stop it by forming young Catholic leaders who could take over politically Vietnam. And the ones who could do that or could help in that were the Jesuits. They were already in Vietnam. They were good in preparing leaders. Andrew still had connections with a lot of Australian Jesuits, and I'm sure, apart from which, he already had been writing articles about the Asians in Australia. No? The presence of Asian students in Australia from Vietnam. So he decided to go to Vietnam. He spent a week there, and then when he came back to Calcutta, he told the brothers that he will be going to start opening houses in Vietnam. Well, to open a community in Vietnam. Okay, there is the article which he wrote, there is the political issues, but I always believe that at the base of it all, is he saw the suffering of the people, and that's what attracted him to Vietnam, to go there. Eventually, young people who wanted to join from America, he invited them to go to Vietnam, which was a good alternative, a better alternative for India, because India was not giving visas to foreigners. So he was inviting them to come over to Vietnam. Little by little, in a few years, in 2-3 years, there was already 4 communities in Vietnam, plus a couple more communities in Cambodia.
How did he communicate with these people? Did he speak Vietnamese or?
No. Okay. What happened, and this is Andrew, eventually he went to a bar, he meets a girl, he meets a widow. She had 3 children, and she was a widow. Her husband was killed by an Australian soldier in a traffic accident. And he started talking about, she spoke English, he started talking about what he intended to do in Vietnam. And he says in his letters, she understood him immediately what he wanted to do. So she became his assistant and obviously his translator.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And what they started were homes for unmarried mothers with children, old women, widows. No, they were living on a first floor of a house, first, second floor, and then the brothers, they were living on the third floor. Yeah.
Now, Vietnam has given rise to book after book, and there are so many more books that could be written because there are so many stories and so many searing experiences. By the end in Vietnam, it seemed to me in reading the book that for Brother Andrew, the experience had been a staggering sort of an experience, an overwhelming sort of an experience. Could you say a bit about that?
Again, overwhelming with the suffering of the people, but at the same time, it was overwhelming for him because of the beauty of the people. He loved the people, he loved the country. No? And it was shattering for him that he had to leave them. No? To the extent that after coming out of Vietnam, his base was Hong Kong. He started opening houses along that rim, Hong Kong, Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, Korea, hoping that when the communism falls, he could go back to Vietnam and Cambodia, which eventually he never did. But yes, he loved the people.
What role do you think his experience of literally being in Saigon as it collapsed, that military collapse and being at the front, as it were, what role did that play in his thinking and his responses?
I didn't get in the last. In his
thinking and his responses. It seems to me, as a reader of newspapers, and mind you, it's not that I haven't traveled. I live in Los Angeles, but I've gone as far south as El Segundo. It seems to me that there are experiences, and then there's an experience of being in a war zone and being on the side that loses and on the side that has to flee for its life. There's that experience, which seems to me to be at a whole different level. And do you think that made an impact on him, unlike his experiences in traveling around the world again and again? Was this wartime experience, because it was a wartime experience, especially significant?
Something which we did not mention is that Andrew was a gambler. Andrew, he became a Jesuit after losing everything on a horse. No? So risk-taking for him was part of his life.
Not to mention joining the Jesuits.
And then the brothers. And so I wouldn't be surprised if being in Saigon for him, it was a risk also. A risk which he loved, maybe. I don't know. No, there are things which we will never know. Being in a war, yeah, you said on the side of the losers. I'm not sure whether, I asked, when I was interviewing brothers who lived there with him, I asked them, did you ever speak about communism or about what was happening in Vietnam while you were in Vietnam? And most of them, they said no, in the sense that Andrew, he was very careful and scared, about being targeted as supporting one group or another. He was very scared to the point that one of the brothers, he had found a red tote bag, which was very practical for him, and Andrew, he absolutely forbid him to use it. I think it would have effect later on in his life, being in a war zone.
Well, today we talk so often about post-traumatic stress disorder. And there could have been that. And it's interesting that one of the most discussed movies of the day, this day, right now, in Los Angeles, you can't help but listen to these discussions, is a World War I classic, All Quiet on the Western Front. And then, of course, now in Ukraine, we have trenches being dug, and the whole specter of a long, drawn-out war. So I had been wondering about that, but now, Mario, could you take us forward, please?
Well, what I can gather is that Brother Andrew was a free spirit. He just was following discerning the spirit. So what caught my attention was that he left the order that he helped to establish with Mother Teresa. So what was the reason why he left that order? Is there any explanation?
Well, there is, yes. Let's see, after he left Saigon in 76, up until 1986, there was the biggest expansion in our congregation. Because from 13 communities in 1976, under his guidance, under his leadership, we ended up having over 90 communities by 1986. There was this huge expansion in 10 years. Whether it was good or not, I won't enter into that. Whether it was positive or negative, I don't know. The brothers wanted it for sure. No, they were ready to do it. But again, it came with how can I say it? It came with an effect. Andrew, he was all over the place, going from one place to another, helping to found the communities. Most of the time, he would travel on his own, and eventually, during that time, he started drinking more. Now, again, the Australians, in a way, they justify it by saying, well, but we Australians, we drink.
That's like the English in England.
Yeah.
That's especially related to soccer, I think.
Soccer and whiskey.
Yeah. So, interesting, in 1986, after 20 years of being the General Superior, he asked the congregation, there was a general chapter going on, and he asked the congregation, it's time that you elect another superior. that was a good move, I think. No? After 20 years, it's time that you have somebody else. And it was after this time that the new leadership team, they called Andrew for a meeting and they told him, look, in these situations, you had been drinking more than you should. And it's good that you go to a rehab. No? At that point, he said, I don't consider myself as an alcoholic. So he asked for a dispensation. But again, yes, the alcohol was there. Also, being a Jesuit, saying this, not being a Jesuit, is because he wanted to leave the brothers already. But being a Jesuit and knowing how the Jesuits work, like for instance in India, they go to a place, they start something from scratch. They start a community of people. They build a church, they build a parish, and then they move on and they leave the parish for the diocese to take over. I've seen this a lot in India, no? So that he wanted to leave the brothers, it wasn't new. It wasn't out of the blues. The brothers were formed. It's time for me to move on. But also there were politics involved, as in all groups, as in all countries, in everything there were politics involved between certain brothers and Andrew.
But he always continued with the MC spirit.
I think he lived it more afterwards. Yeah. After he left the brothers, he never left the priesthood. He was still a priest incarnated under the Bishop of Calcutta. He went back to Australia and he started going around giving retreats, missions, days of prayer, spiritual talks to anybody who asked him. No? And so that was his life for the next 10 to 12 years. No? He also went out of Australia giving retreats like Pakistan, Canada, America, India. Again, I see two things. One is the going and comings between 76 and 86. It was more, in quotes, crazy. No? Whereas now between 88 and 2000, his going and coming, it was more of a pilgrimage. He's going around of Australia, all over Australia, walking, taking the bus, taking the train, or by air, whatever. But it's a more quiet going and coming. It's sort of a pilgrimage. The other thing which I would like to add is that between 88 and 2000, in that time, a lot of people went to his retreats, and a lot of people I met, I interviewed, and amazingly enough, nobody said that Andrew was drinking during that time. They would say he would take a beer. He would occasionally take a beer or two with us, but he was not drinking. So was it a case of a 10-year PTSD? I don't know. I asked not to justify, not to give a name to what Andrew was passing through, but I asked a few psychiatrists all in 3 parts of the world. I explained the situation, not to get a posthumous diagnosis, but I asked them, could it be a case of PTSD? Some said yes, but interestingly enough, the Maltese psychiatrist, he told me, no, I don't think so. Because after the fall of Saigon, which happened in March, he stayed up till August on his own in Vietnam. He told me the fact that somebody would stay, would have the stamina to stay in such situations on his own and survive, I don't think he was having a PTSD. Again, we're talking about these things from a quote psychological perspective, but Mario, he mentioned something about grace in the beginning. And I believe that something which kept Andrew going was, yes, grace. Grace and his belief that he was a wounded person. He believed he was wounded, he believed he was broken, he believed that he was a fragile person, he believed that he was an unfaithful man, he said it, and yet God does good things through him, or through everybody who recognizes this fragility, this woundedness, and this dependency on God.
Amen. Mario, maybe we should shift a bit from Brother Andrew to what's going on today with the Missionary Brothers.
Right. So what are the ministries that the brothers are pursuing today?
We're basically, wherever we go, we're basically for the poorest of the poor. And that depends on, hopefully, that depends on the country we are at. Like for instance, but most of the works, for instance, in India, most of the works revolve around medical works, like with leprosy patients or TB patients or AIDS patients, mentally challenged men, old men. Like for instance, in India, I remember in the 80s, 90s, we had what we used to call slum schools. Nowadays, it's not needed for us to have them because the government is doing something much more in education. In Africa, we still have what we call slum schools or informal schools because it's needed. In other places, it's more a matter of presence. Like for instance, England and Paris. It's more a matter of a presence of a small group of brothers, and there are, even in Los Angeles, and there are people coming in and sharing a meal with the brothers. It depends where we are. Unfortunately, and this is sad to say, there is the trend of staying in homes, of having a home for the mentally challenged and staying there and working there, even because of the pressures of the governments nowadays to have your homes to a standard. They ask us to have this thing and this thing, like CCTVs, and you start going in and becoming an institution. Unfortunately, Andrew was against institutions, even Mother, but Andrew was against the big institutions. He wanted us to go much more out, meet people, be with the people, especially in villages.
Now,
Are you?
go ahead.
Do you have any missions in Latin America?
Yes. Right now I'm in Peru. We have a house in Medellin in Colombia. We have a house in Mexico. We have a house in Guatemala and 2 houses in Haiti. We had a lot more houses which they needed to be closed because of lack of brothers.
So what you are saying you have lack of vocation?
Yes, we don't have vocations.
To what you attribute that?
Maybe we're not living as we should be living.
So you need another Brother Andrew?
I think so.
Could his name be Carmel?
No. This is the joke of the day.
Listen, you went from being a researcher to being the point person for a significant number of mentally disabled and mentally ill people just outside of Lima, Peru, where I remind you is, if you needed any reminder, there are once again political problems.
Yeah.
How's it going?
We're about 12, 13 kilometers away from the city center. That's where close we are to the demonstrations. But most of the demonstrations, they are being held outside of the capital city. And that is the problem. The problem is that Peru, and I won't go into all this, the political reasons, but Peru is so centralized, everything happens in Lima. If you want to get a good education, you have to come to Lima. If you want to get a good hospital, you have to come to Lima. Imagine people have to travel hours and hours and hours by boats, by buses, just for to have a better education or a good education. And that is the problem. No? I go back a little bit to the vocation thing. I think young people, they have a difficult life nowadays, more difficult than when I joined in 1990, in the sense that there are so many things, so many options you can do in life without becoming a brother, and you would still be doing good things for others without becoming religious. So I think they have a difficult time to decide, apart from which, who would want to become a brother? There's no prestige. And that is the case, especially in Asian countries and African countries. Well, even South American countries, no? Young people, they prefer to become priests and have some prestige, and most probably a little bit more power.
We're closing in on the end of the hour, and we're always short of time, but we're Easter people, right?
Yes.
We are Easter people, and struggle as we might, the greatest victory of all is already ours. So what are your plans for Easter?
Easter Day?
At the very least.
Yes, Easter Day, most probably. I will still get up at 4:30. At 5, we will have prayers, and by 5:45, we would be bathing our boys.
Right. Now, I can tell you that the Carmelite nuns in Alhambra, by 9 o'clock, we'll be having a killer breakfast on Easter morning.
We might have a special breakfast. It depends on me what I put on the table, because I'm in charge of the kitchen.
Yes, Mario.
I have a question. So the charism is to be with the poorest of the poor. And yet, many young people today, millennial or post-millennial, have a lot of choices, so to speak, in their life, so that their charism is not attractive to them because it has no power. Now, having read Pope Francis said you need to go to the peripheries. Now, the peripheries also can mean not only the poor of the poor materially, it could mean the poor of the poor spiritually. So you may find people who are really, I don't want to say lost, but without direction in universities, in where they have some means, but they are completely without direction. Do you have any apostolate directed to those young people who may not be materially poor, but still need encounter Christ in those places where they have too many choices and they choose the wrong thing? And
right now, I'm thinking in other places. I don't think we have directly, consciously taking that step to be with them. Most probably, I envision other congregations, they do that. Especially congregations who run schools, who run universities, and they have that presence there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've, and we always do, we've mentioned today the American Solidarity Party. We've mentioned Latin America. And we always mention, too, Thomism. And that allows us to speak a little Latin once we've introduced Thomism. But of course, we're very current. We're very current. And so I will mention only one, what's referred to dismissively as a scholastic tag. Quid recipitur ad modum recipientis recipitur. Whatever is received according to the mode of the person receiving. Now here I am, stuck in Los Angeles, stuck, mind you, and whatever I receive is received through the multiplex lenses of Los Angeles. And now back to Brother Andrew. Brother Andrew, in various ways, came through Los Angeles, and in various ways, with internal struggles in the order, Los Angeles played a role. And I couldn't help but note that in one of his letters, he says, Los Angeles is absolutely disconcerting, huge, incomprehensible, and rivaled only by Hong Kong. But the difference is in Hong Kong, they know they're in Hong Kong. Whereas in Los Angeles, they don't really get it. Now, you've come through Los Angeles. Do you have any comment on this comment of his?
Well, the only thing I can say is that in his own way, he loved Los Angeles also. He loved what the brothers, they were doing in Los Angeles. So.
Now, did he refer to our city as La Ciudad de Los Ángeles Casi Perdidos?
Well, come on, it's a city which absorbs.
Oh, completamente perdidos.
It is a city which absorbs you.
All right, we're going to fight to the last man here to avoid absorption.
Yeah.
Are you, final question, do you have in your pastoral plan to go to Paraguay?
Aha.
Mario, I'm nobody. I'm not a superior. I'm not.
He's carefully positioned himself not to be a superior.
Are you from Paraguay?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I would love to go to Paraguay. I would love to go to Cuba.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
And there it would be interesting because we would not be able to have a home for anybody. And there we would have to find our own way to interpret the charism in such a place. And it's an interesting challenge.
Well, a recent pastor of mine was from Cuba, and he said in Cuba, the only way the leadership will leave is sideways. I leave that for your reflection. On a far, 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 far better note, we always end with the gospel for today. This is from Luke. While still more people gathered in the crowd, Jesus said to them, "This generation is an evil generation. It seeks a sign, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. At the judgment, the Queen of the South will rise with the men of this generation, and she will condemn them because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And there is something greater than Solomon here. At the judgment, the men of Nineveh will arise with this generation and condemn it, because at the preaching of Jonah, they repented. And there is something greater than Jonah here. Come, Lord Jesus, come." Thanks so much, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
For
brother.
having me in the show.
Excellent.
Till we
Buena
meet
suerte.
again.
Gracias.
Y otra cosa, nunca contaban con nuestra astucia.
¿Y usted dónde está ahorita?
En Kansas.
Oh, ya. Qué
All
bueno.
Estoy en una misión to
¿Sí?
convert the gringos.
No es posible.
Chao.
Chao, gracias.
Ciao.